Long ago in the heart of Lagos, where the hum of life never ceased, there lived a woman named Adamma. She was not unlike many others in the city, struggling to survive, dreaming of more. But Adane harbored a quiet darkness inside her, a desire for wealth that overshadowed everything else. When she gave birth to her first child, Obi, the city seemed to hold its breath. The arrival of Obi should have been a moment of joy, a celebration of life. But for Adamma, it was not joy that filled her heart, it was opportunity. As she crowded the baby in her arms, her mind raced. At that moment, Adamma saw not a child, but a commodity. A price tag hung invisibly around Obi's neck. The market in Lagos was a jungle. Opportunities could be found if you knew where to look. And Adamma had learned early that survival was not about love, but about power. And that power came through money. She thought of the wealthy merchant who had approached her a week earlier, offering a sum that could change her life. He wanted a healthy child, someone to adopt, and Adamma's son, with his bright eyes and sturdy build, fit the description perfectly. The idea of handing over her flesh and blood struck her, but the thought of the money that would follow almost made her heart race with anticipation. Adamma's parents had struggled all their life, never owing more than what they could carry. They were good, kind people, but they never escaped poverty. So Adamma vowed she would do whatever it takes to rise above that. And when the opportunity presented itself, she made her choice. The deal was swiftly. The merchant, a man whose face she barely remembered, took Obi from her arms and promised a future of luxury. She watched as the child she had bettered was carried away. Her heart was aching, but her resolve hardening. It was done. She had sold her first child. As she walked back into her hut, the flickering sound of the money in her pocket filled her eyes. It was heavy, and it felt like the weight of her soul. Time passed, and Lagos continued to pulse with its unending energy. For Adamma, the city had become a place of opportunity and emptiness. Every new day was a chance to climb higher, to make more money, to sell more. And with each passing year, the weight of her choices grew heavier, though she rarely acknowledged it. Adamma continued to bear children, each one another opportunity to build the wealth she so desperately craved. She no longer felt the sharp pang of regrets when she handed them over to strangers. There was no room for remorse when there was money to be made. Her second child, a daughter named Ife, was sold to a woman who had lost her own children. The price was higher than she had ever dreamed, and Adamma marveled at how easy it had become. The transactions were swift, efficient, with no emotion attached. She had learned the art of detachment well. The third child, a son named Jide, was placed into the hands of a wealthy couple who had offered him a life Adamma never could. They promised him a future of education, comfort, and opportunity. And in return, Adamma was offered a sum that could fill every empty corner of her heart. But over the years, something began to shift within her. She no longer felt the joy that came with a windfall of money. The empty spaces in her heart, once filled with allure of wealth, remained void. There was no peace in the money she earned, no satisfaction in the home she now owned, no joy in the trinkets and fine clothes she wore. Something deep inside her changed, though she could not name it. Her life had become a routine of birth and sales. With each child she gave away, a little piece of herself disappeared. In Lagos, the market was always changing. The tides of life never still. But for Adamma, the exchange of children for money had become a suffocating circle, one that left her more isolated than ever before. Then came the day when Adamma found herself pregnant once more. She hadn't expected it. At her age, she had grown accustomed to the rhythms of her life, bearing children, selling them and moving on. But this pregnancy was different. It came with a strange heaviness that she couldn't shake off, as if the city itself was warning her of something unknown, something darker that lay ahead. The father of this child was a wealthy man, a trader from the north, who had promised her a future of unimaginable wealth. He had eyes like the night sky, cold, calculating, and filled with ambition. He had promised her that he would never have to part with their children again. But even as he spoke those words, Adama knew that such words rarely held weight in the world of Lagos. When the child, a girl, was born on a stormy night, the sky itself seemed to mourn her arrival. The rain fell in torrents, and the wind horned through the narrow street of Lagos, as if the elements were angry at her birth. Adama stared at the small, fragile child in her arms. Her skin was soft, her eyes wide with innocence. She named her Kemi. For the first time in years, Adama felt something she hadn't expected. A flicker of love. It wasn't strong, but it was there. A bond that she hadn't formed with her previous children. A bond that made her hesitate when the first buyer came knocking. A wealthy woman from the city had heard of Adama's children, and she was willing to pay a price for the girl. Adama had grown accustomed to the transactions, the quick exchanges, the coldness of it all. But this time, as the woman gazed at Kemi, Adama's heart skipped a beat. The woman's eyes were not filled with kindness, but with the hunger of someone who wanted what they could not have. She was no different from the other who had taken Adama's children before her. The woman's offer was the highest she had ever received. It was more than enough to ensure she would never need to sell another child again. And yet, as the weight of the decision settled upon her, Adama knew this transaction would be different. She could feel it in her bones. As the days passed, Adama's resolve began to weaken. The weight of Kemi in her arms, the softness of her skin, the innocence in her wide eyes, stirred something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in years. But even as she held her daughter, the familiar pool of money gnawed at her. She had lived her entire life in a world where wealth was the only measure of success. With the promise of riches always within her, how could she possibly refuse? The woman who had come to buy Kemi was powerful, a respected figure in the city, known for her beauty and wealth. She walked into Adama's home with the confidence of someone who had always gotten what she wanted. She gazed at Kemi with calculating eyes, already imagining how the child would fit into her life, her plans. The price she offered was more than Adama had ever seen. It was a fortune. It was a chance to buy herself the luxury she had always dreamt of. "She's perfect," the woman said, her voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "I will raise her with care. Give her a life she could never have here. You will never have to struggle again," she said to Adama. Adama's heart fluttered at the words. The temptation was overwhelming. Her mind raced. This money could change everything. She could pay off debts, buy a larger home, live without worry. All of it just for giving away this one child. But as she looked at Kemi, her daughter's eyes locking with hers, a fleeting hesitation passed through her heart. Could she really do this? Could she sell the only one who had brought a spark of something resembling love into her heart? It was the first time in years that Adama questioned the life she had chosen. But the fear of returning to the life she had before, the poverty, the struggle, was stronger. The decision was made as quickly as it had been with her other children. Adama handed Kemi over to the woman, accepting the vast sum in return. She barely spoke as she walked away, the sound of Kemi's faint cries echoing in her ears, a stark reminder of the price she had just paid. But the money in her hands drowned it out, just like it had done in the past. The sacrifice was complete, and yet Adama felt an emptiness inside her, a hollowness that no amount of money could fill. Years passed, and Lagos continued to change, growing and evolving, a city that never slept. But for Adama, it felt as though time had slowed to a crawl. Her life had become a blur of transaction, each one stripping away another part of her humanity. She had more money than she had ever imagined, a house filled with luxuries, fine clothes, and a certain status in the city that others envied. But with it came with isolation. The people around her were afraid of her, and some looked at her with pity, the kind that only comes when someone has lost their soul. Her friends had long disappeared. Those who once whispered their admiration for her cleverness now spoke of her behind her back, calling her a heartless woman, a monster. But Adama didn't care. She had learned to silence the voices, to shut out the nagging doubts, the whispers of conscience that tried to remind her of the children she had sold. She had made her bed. Now she could lie in it. But despite the comfort of her new life, there was no peace. The house was empty, the rooms too quiet. The silence was suffocating. Adama had no one to share with her wealth. Adama had no one to share her wealth with, no one to laugh with, no one to care for her. She had traded her children for money, and in the end, it was the money that had left her utterly alone. One day, as the sun began to set over Lagos, casting long shadow over the busy streets, Adama received a visitor. It was a man she hadn't seen in years. The merchant who had bought her first son, Obi. He was older now, his face lined with the wear of time, but there was a strange intensity in his eyes. Adama, he said, his voice low, I have come to speak with you. She had handed her child over to him without hesitation, without a second thought. But now, as she stood face to face with him, Adama felt a pang of unease. The years had changed her. The money, the power, everything she had built had come at a price. One she was no longer sure she was willing to pay. What do you want? Adama asked. She had not expected to see him again. But here he was, standing in her grand house, looking at her with a knowing expression. I have been watching you, he said. You've changed. You have everything, but you have nothing. Adama frowned. I have more than I could ever have dreamt of. Do you? The man's eyes softened with something that could have been pity. You sold your children, Adama, and now you are paying the price. You don't know it yet, but the weight of your choices will catch up with you. It always does. The word struck like a blow. She had sold her children, yes, but no one had ever spoken to her like this. She was used to being admired and feared even. But this man, this stranger from her past, seemed to see something in her that she hadn't even realized was there. Is that why you have come? To remind me of my sins? He shook his head slowly, as if pitying her. No, Adama, I've come to tell you that it's not too late to stop. There's still time to turn back, to fix what you've broken. Adama laughed bitterly. It's too late for that. I have made my choices. The man smiled, a sad knowing smile. The city sees everything, Adama. Nothing goes unnoticed here, and the past always catches up to you. With that, he turned and left, leaving Adama standing alone, staring at the door. His words lingered in her mind, a haunting echo she couldn't quite shake. Something inside her stirred, something that had been dormant for years. Adama sat in silence after the man left, the weight of his words lingering in the air like smoke. The heavy house around her, filled with riches and trappings of success, suddenly felt suffocating. The silence in the room was oppressive. The walls, once a symbol of achievement, now seemed to whisper accusations. Her eyes drifted to the photo on the mantelpiece. One of her first children, Obi, smiling in the eyes of the wealthy merchant who had taken him. She had never once thought of him again. But now, that photo seemed like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Her other children, Ife, Jide, Kemi, were scattered across the country, raised by strangers, living lives she would never be part of. They were strangers to her now. Their faces fading from her memory, their voices a distant echo. Adama had buried the guilt deep inside her, hidden it beneath the piles of gold and the comfort of her newfound life. But tonight, the weight of it all was too much. As the night deepened, her mind wandered. She remembered the days when she had crowded them in their arms, felt their warmth, heard their cries. There had been a time when her heart had beaten for that. But in exchange for those tender moments, she had chosen power. She had chosen wealth. And what she had gained in return? A cold, empty house and the whole echo of her own regrets. Suddenly, Adama was struck by a terrifying thought. Had she traded her soul for money? Was it too late to undo the damage? Could she have a second chance? The image of Obi's face, so innocent and full of hope, came flooding back to her. She could see it clearly in her mind, as if he was standing in front of her. What have you done to me, Mama? The words ranged in her head. Though they had never passed his lips, she had sold him for money. And in that moment, the truth of what she had done, what she had become, sank into her soul like a weight she could never lift. Then one evening, as she sat by her window, watching the sunset over the city, a figure appeared at her doorstep. It was a woman, The woman stood in her doorstep with a boy of about 15 years. Without a word, the woman walked into Adama's home, her presence commanding. The silence between them stretched for what seemed like an eternity. But Adama didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mind raced. Her thoughts tangled with a guilt and remorse that had been building for days. After what seemed like forever, the woman finally spoke. "I have come to ask for your help." Adama looked at her, confused. "Help? I don't understand. Who are you?" "I am the mother of one of your children," the woman said softly, the words hanging heavily in the air. "I have raised him as mine. He doesn't know who you are. He doesn't know the truth." Adama's heart stopped. It took a moment for her to process the woman's word. What do you want from me?" she stammered. The woman stepped closer. "I want you to see him. I want you to look at him. Because he is not the child you sold. He is a part of you. He is your flesh and blood." Adama felt the world around her shift. The floor beneath her seemed to tip. The walls closing in. She hadn't seen Obi in years. He had become someone else. Someone she had willingly let go. Someone she had sacrificed for the sake of money. But now, here was this stranger, a living reminder of what she had given away. The woman pointed at Obi, sitting close to her. "This is your son," the woman said softly. "His name is Obi, and he's come to find you." Adama's breath caught in her throat as she gazed down at the boy before her. His face was a mirror of herself, but with a sweetness that made her heart ache. His eyes, wide and full of innocence, seemed to see straight through her, as if he already knew the truth. The boy didn't say anything at first. He just looked up at her with an unspoken question in his eyes, as if he were waiting for an answer. And in that moment, Adama knew that she could never undo what she had done. She had sold him. She had given him away. But the love, the connection, that bond between mother and child was still there. Was it possible to rebuild something so broken? Something lost so long ago? For a long while, there was only silence in the room. Then the boy spoke. His voice was soft and hesitant. Are you my mother?" he asked. Adama's heart shattered at that moment. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words couldn't come. She wanted to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to tell him how sorry she was. But all she could do was stare at him, the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest like 1,000 bricks. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt the overwhelming rush of guilt. This was the child she had sold, the child she had abandoned, and now he was standing before her, seeking for something she wasn't sure she could give. She reached out slowly, trembling, and cupped his face in her hands. His skin was warm under her touch, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the connection she had lost all those years. But the truth remained. He was not the same child she had once held in her hands. He had been raised by another woman, another family, in a different world. And no matter how much Adama wished for it, there was no going back. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of urgency, as if Adama could feel time slipping away from her. She had no idea what to do, no idea how to make things right. But the boy, Obi, was here now, standing before her, and she knew she had to try. There was no going back to the life she had once known. She couldn't undo the damage, but she could at least try to be a mother he deserved. The first few days were awkward. Obi was hesitant, unsure of how to act around her. He had spent his childhood with strangers who had taken him in and cared for him. He had lived a life far removed. He had lived a life far removed from the one Adama had imagined for him when she had sold him off. Far removed from the one Adama had imagined for him when she first sold him. Adama watched him from a distance, noting how different he was from the child she had once held in her arms. He was no longer that innocent, helpless infant. He was a boy, strong and independent, but broken in ways that Adama couldn't fully understand. He had grown up without her, without the nurturing warmth of a mother. But she was determined. Every day she tried to reach out to him, to bridge the gap between them. The boy who had once been hers was now a stranger. "Obi," she said one evening, her voice was trembling, "I am sorry. I don't know how to make things right. I can't undo what I have done, but I want to try. I want you to know that I'm here for you." Obi looked at her with his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mama, but I'm willing to try. I just need time." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The relationship between Adamma and Obi remained strained, but it was slowly changing. The boy, though conscious and distant, was beginning to let her in, just a little. He still had questions that Adamma couldn't answer. Why had she sold him? Why had she chosen money over him? Why had she let him go? These were questions that hung between them, unanswered and unresolved. But something unexpected happened. Adamma began to realize the journey of redemption was not about undoing her past actions. It was about accepting them, about confronting the darkness inside her and accepting responsibility. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was the only path forward. One morning, as they sat together in their living room, Obi looked at her and said something that made Adamma's heart leap. "I'm not angry with you anymore, Mama," he said softly. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I understand now. I can see you are trying, and that's enough for me." Adamma felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she smiled at him. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was enough. They would never be the same as they once were. The past could never be erased, but they could start again, in their own way, on their own terms. Obi, though cut short, began to trust her more. The walls between them were slowly crumbling, brick by brick. They shared small moments together, conversation over meals, long walks through the streets. Months passed and the landscape of Adamma's life began to shift in ways she never expected. She had become more involved in the community, using the wealth she had accumulated over the years to help others, offering scholarships, providing food for the less fortunate, and supporting initiatives that help children in need. It wasn't a grand gesture of redemption, but it was something, a small act of kindness, a way of paying back the world that has watched her fall into darkness. Every time she looked at Obi, she saw not just the child she had sold, but the children she had abandoned. The regret tormented her, a reminder that things could never be fully undone. But there was one thing Adamma had learned over time. Redemption was not about perfection. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that mistake didn't happen. It was about taking responsibility, doing the best you could with the time you had left, and never giving up on trying to be better. Adamma learned, as we all must, that no matter how deep the scars of the past may run, there is always a chance to start again. What do you think of Adamma's journey? Could she have done more? Or was redemption truly enough in the end? Please let me know in the comment section.